first story. The echoes of Wyndham. Never should have stopped in Wyndham. The town was barely a dot on the map, swallowed by thick woods and an eerie silence that seemed to stretch for miles. My car had broken down on Route 17, and with no cell service, I had no choice but to walk into town, hoping to find a mechanic. That was when I saw it, the Wyndham Grand Hotel. The building loomed over the town square, a relic from a forgotten time. Its once grand facade was cracked, its windows dark like empty sockets. A neon sign flickered weakly above the entrance. Vacancy. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped inside. The lobby smelled of old wood and dust, and the air carried a strange chill. A small bell sat on the reception desk, and when I rang it, an elderly woman emerged from the shadows. Her eyes were clouded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Looking for a room?" she asked in a voice that barely rose above a whisper. I nodded. She slid an old-fashioned key across the counter, her fingers lingering for a moment too long on my hand. "Room 306. Stay inside after midnight." I frowned. "Excuse me?" But she had already turned away, disappearing through a door marked private. My footsteps echoed up the grand staircase as I made my way to the third floor. The hallway was lined with faded wallpaper, peeling at the edges. My room was at the very end of the corridor. Inside, everything was old but well kept. A massive wooden bed, a dusty dresser, and a mirror covered by a white sheet. Something about the mirror unsettled me. My fingers hesitated before pulling the sheet away. The glass was cloudy, but as I stared into it, I could swear a shadow moved behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Shaking off the unease, I showered and climbed into bed. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows. Just as I was about to drift off, a soft sound made my breath hitch. A girl was crying. I sat up, my skin prickling. The sound was coming from the hallway. I opened the door cautiously and peered out. The corridor was empty, but the crying continued. It was coming from the room across from mine, room 307. I knocked. "Hello? Are you okay?" The crying stopped abruptly. Silence stretched. Then the doorknob turned slowly. The door creaked open an inch. A girl stood there, her hair dark and tangled, her dress tattered. Her eyes were wide and filled with something beyond fear. "Help me," she whispered. A shiver ran down my spine. "What's wrong?" She stepped forward. The light from my room cast a shadow behind her, but her shadow moved wrong. It twisted and stretched, crawling along the floor like living tendrils. My pulse pounded. "Please," she begged. "He's coming." The air turned ice cold. A deep guttural growl rumbled through the hallway. The girl's eyes darted toward the darkness at the end of the corridor. Then she vanished. I stumbled back into my room, slamming the door. My hands trembled as I locked it. My breath came in short gasps. It had to be a trick of the light, my exhaustion playing tricks on me. Then the knocking started, soft at first, then louder, more frantic. "Let me in!" the girl wailed. "Please, he's here!" I backed away. The mirror reflected the door, but something was wrong. A figure stood in the reflection, tall and featureless, with hollow eyes. Its fingers stretched toward the girl, who was pounding desperately on the wood. Then her screams were cut off. Silence. My heart pounded in my ears. Slowly, I turned toward the door. The handle twisted. The lock clicked open by itself. The door creaked open an inch, revealing only darkness. I ran. Down the hallway, down the stairs, through the empty lobby. The front doors were locked. My fists pounded against them, but they wouldn't budge. Then a whisper breathed against my ear. "You should have stayed inside." Cold hands clamped around my wrists, dragging me back into the darkness. The last thing I saw was my reflection in the lobby mirror, my mouth open in a scream, but my reflection grinning back at me. Then, everything went black. Third story. The Echoes of Wyndham. I had always been drawn to abandoned places, but Wyndham Hotel was different. It was not just forgotten, it was cursed. Locals in the small town of Wyndham, Maine never spoke of it, and when I asked, they only shook their heads, warning me to stay away. That, of course, only made me more curious. The hotel stood at the edge of a dense forest, its once grand facade now covered in vines and decay. As I stepped through the entrance, the air grew heavy, thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something rotten. My flashlight flickered. I tightened my grip on it, scanning the lobby. The chandeliers were coated in dust, their crystals hanging like frozen tears. The reception desk was overturned, papers scattered across the floor. But the strangest part was the silence. Even the wind outside seemed to avoid this place. I ventured deeper, my footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust. The stories about Wyndham Hotel were vague. Some said guests vanished without a trace. Others claimed they went mad. But one thing was certain. The hotel had been abandoned overnight in 1963. Dishes still sat on tables in the dining hall. Suitcases remained unpacked in rooms. It was as if time had stopped. Room 306. That was the room I was looking for. According to the few surviving records, it belonged to a guest named Arthur Langley, who had checked in but never checked out. The police never found him, only the words, "Let me out," scratched into the walls. I climbed the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. The third floor felt different, colder. The wallpaper peeled away in long strips, revealing blackened wood beneath. I found 306 and hesitated. My breath came shallow as I turned the knob. The room was empty. No furniture, no signs of life, just a gaping darkness that my flashlight barely penetrated. But then, the door slammed shut behind me. My pulse pounded. I turned, but the knob wouldn't budge. The temperature dropped sharply, my breath turning to mist. And then I heard it, a whisper, just behind me. "You shouldn't be here." I spun around, but no one was there. The walls trembled, and suddenly the room shifted. The ceiling stretched higher, the walls pushed outward. I stumbled back, my flashlight flickering wildly. Then, something moved in the shadows. A figure, barely visible, crawling toward me. Its fingers were long, scraping against the wooden floor. Its face was wrong, distorted, as if it had been stretched beyond recognition. I slammed my fist against the door. "Let me out!" I screamed. The words I had read on the walls earlier now seemed like a warning. The thing in the darkness let out a low, rattling breath. It was laughing. Then the room tilted, and I fell backward. When I opened my eyes, I was lying in the lobby. The sun had risen, its light spilling through the broken windows. But something was wrong. The reception desk was no longer overturned. The chandeliers gleamed, free of dust. I pushed myself up, my heart pounding. The Wyndham Hotel was alive again. Footsteps echoed behind me. A man in a bellhop uniform approached. "Sir, your room is ready," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He gestured toward the staircase. "Room 306 is waiting for you." I turned to run, but the lobby doors had vanished. The windows showed nothing but darkness outside. I was trapped. And then I understood. I had become part of the hotel. Just like Arthur Langley. Just like all the others. As the bellhop led me upstairs, I heard whispers all around me, growing louder with each step. They were welcoming me home. Second story. The Echoes of Wyndham. I never believed in ghosts, not really. But what happened at the Wyndham Hotel changed everything. I was driving through upstate New York when a storm forced me to find shelter. The neon sign of the Wyndham Hotel flickered in the darkness, its old Victorian structure looming over the deserted road. I pulled in, shaking off the rain as I stepped inside. The lobby smelled of dust and faded perfume. The receptionist, a pale, thin woman named Mrs. Holloway, handed me an antique key. "Room 306, she said, her voice a whisper. "No refunds." The hallway was dim, the sconces casting shadows that seemed to move. My room was cold, despite the heater groaning in the corner. The wallpaper curled at the edges, and the mirror above the dresser was cloudy, as if something had once pressed against it from the inside. I tried to sleep, but at 3:06 a.m., I woke to a sound, a faint knock from inside the closet. My breath hitched. I told myself it was nothing, just the building settling. Then the whispering began, soft, urgent voices just beyond the door. I sat up, every muscle in my body stiff. Slowly, I reached for my phone, but the screen was dead. The lamp flickered, casting long shadows. The closet door rattled. I stood and walked toward it. My fingers trembled as I reached for the knob. The whispering stopped. Silence. I held my breath and pulled the door open. Nothing. Just old coats swaying slightly, as if disturbed. I let out a nervous laugh, but as I turned back, I saw it. The mirror. Something stood behind me. A woman. Her face was hollow, eyes black pits. Her lips curled into a silent scream as she raised a skeletal hand toward my shoulder. I spun around, but there was nothing there. My reflection was alone. The air turned ice cold. My breath came out in mist. The lamp buzzed and died, leaving me in darkness. Then the door slammed shut. I ran to it, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The whispering returned, growing louder, overlapping voices clawing at my ears. The mirror rattled. I turned back and saw something moving inside it. A room, identical to mine, but not. The furniture was decayed, the bed blackened with something dark and wet, and the woman was there, closer now. Her hands pressed against the glass, fingers curling like claws. Then I saw myself. But it wasn't me. My reflection smirked, its eyes too dark, too empty. It raised a hand and knocked once on the glass. I stumbled back as the mirror shattered. The shards sliced through the air, and a force yanked me forward. I screamed, but my voice was drowned out by the howling wind that erupted from the broken frame. I woke up in the lobby. Mrs. Holloway stood behind the desk, watching me with knowing eyes. "Room 306? She asked. I nodded, my mouth dry. She slid a guest book toward me. I hesitated, then flipped to the last signed entry. My name was already there, dated 50 years ago. The air turned heavy. I turned to run, but the doors were gone. The lobby stretched into endless darkness. My breath hitched as the whispering returned, surrounding me, calling me back to my room. I was never meant to leave.